right, well, let's get to it. So, good evening. I am David Bowman. I'm the Executive Director for the Four Corners Regional Education Cooperative #1 up here in Farmington. And we've put together a series of trainings as a part of the RECA's TechBits series to help educators and others master some of the technology tools that they may have available to them, see how they might use them for their classrooms or other purposes, and basically pick up some new skills that allow them to use their technology more effectively. So this session is the first of a 4-part series on Excel. And we're labeling this 4 essential hacks for Excel, or 4 essential hacks for getting information out of data. And so you see we've got in front of us a rather large data set. And I use that term very loosely because what the techniques that we're going to go over during the next hour will work for any size of data set. So in the many years that I've been running numbers and using Excel and doing analyses and all those kinds of things, I've worked with very small data sets, 10, 20 lines of data. I've worked with very large data sets, 20, 30,000 lines of data. And as it turns out, the 4 techniques that we're going to look at during this time will work exactly the same. And the neat thing is that because we're going to basically put Excel through some paces tonight, it doesn't matter how big the data sets are, it's still going to take the exact same techniques, it's going to take the same effort, and Excel will be able to do some amazing things for us, just lickety-split. It's an amazing tool. I'm not a fan of Microsoft in general, but I got to tell you, they've got a winner with Excel once you learn some essential techniques. So just in the way of introduction, so when I'm looking at numbers, when I'm looking at data sets in Excel, it seems like I'm doing the same 4 techniques all the time. I mean, the things that we're going to do, 4 things we're going to do tonight are probably the most common things that I do when I'm looking at some student data, whether it's on Excel or Google Sheets. These will also work for Google Sheets if you're a Google fan. So let's just jump right into it. When the very first thing we have to do, obviously, when we're looking at numbers, is we have to figure out the questions to ask, because there's, if we look at this, we've got 100 lines of kids' data, and we've got test scores, first test, second test. We've got information about how long it took them to take the test, what their scores were. We've got gains that they made from first to second. We've got a lot of stuff here. So the big part really happens, the most important part really happens before we start doing anything with Excel. And that is to ask the questions. But once we figure out what the question is, what do we want to know? Basically, we got data, what do we want to know? Once we ask the question, then we just have to figure out, all right, where are the data in this, in all of this spreadsheet that's going to contain the information we need to answer those questions. So we're going to run through 4, and everything we do is going to be predicated on that. So you're going to see that whenever we do a technique, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to ask a question, figure out where the data are to answer the question, and then we're going to use these techniques to actually get the information and the answers to the questions that we want. So with that being said, that's sort of the overview of what we're doing and why we're doing it. The number one thing, the first hack, is going to make it very, very simple to do everything else. And that is something called named ranges. So let's take a look. So let's say, for example, we've got this cell right here. Let me highlight just very briefly. So we've got this cell right here that I'm marking in blue. As soon as I can find blue, there we go. So that cell has a name. It has a reference, and it is called C3. Column C, row 3. That's how Excel refers to that name. And we can highlight across a bunch of cells and that's C3 through, for example, C20. Well, the neat thing is this. We can give our own names to those cells, and we can give our own names to that group or that range of cells that make it very simple later to figure out what we're looking at, where it is, and what information that we want from it. So let's just take a look at one. So we've got this one called C3. Now, where do I find that? Up here on the upper left, you see it says C3, and that's how Excel refers to it. But we can take that out or just highlight it and type something else in there. We can give it our own name that's meaningful to us. You know, C3 doesn't mean anything, but what is this? This is first student gain. This is the first cell within the student gain. So I just simply type in first student gain. I hit enter. Now, when I go back to it, it's no longer being referred to as C3, it's being referred to as first student gain. So we can give names to cells, and then later we can just simply refer back to that name. We don't have to refer to C3 anymore. We refer to, in this case, first student gain. All right, so that's pretty neat. But where it becomes really valuable, honestly, is when we start giving names to entire ranges or entire subsets within the data. That's going to make everything else just crazy simple for us to do. So let's start. So I've already got a bunch of these named over here just for the sake of time, but let me show you how it's done. So right here in column B, we've got all the grades for those students. So we've got a bunch of test scores for kids. Column B is the grades for those kids. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with the very top one, which is B3, all the way to the very bottom of that set of data, and I'm going to give it a name. In this case, I'm going to call it student grades. So I type in student grades up there, hit enter. Now, that group of cells is simply called student grades. See, if I highlight it, it says student grades. And check this out, because this is pretty cool. So up here, where we've got the cell reference or the cell name, there's a little down arrow, a little pull down. And what it will do is it will give us the list of cells and ranges that have their own names. So when I click on student grades, it's automatically going to highlight and select that entire range of data. So the very first thing, really, you know, when I get data, I'm like, okay, I got this data, I got this spreadsheet. I might have to do a little cleanup just to make sure all the numbers are numbers and the words are words and that kind of stuff. But when I'm getting ready to start pulling information out of the data, the very first thing I'm going to do, I will guarantee you the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to name my ranges, because it's going to make everything else easier. So let's go ahead and do a few of these. We've got student grades. That range has a name. I'm going to go ahead and relabel this up here, student grades. So these column headings, these are the original names up here, but just as a way to remember what I call it, I typically swap out the column header and put in my own name. That way it's like, oh, what did I call that? I called it student grades. Now, I know we're going to need, thinking ahead, we're going to need to pull some information out of overall gain. So I'm going to select all of that, and I'm going to call it overall gain. So you'll see up here in my list of named ranges, I've got one called overall gain. And there it is. And voila. We're probably going to need percentile. We might. So let me go ahead and rename this for starters. And percentile, overall scale score, overall placement, we might. So I think we will need percentile. So let me go ahead and do the same thing there. Select all the data under percentile, and I'm going to call it percentile 1 because it's the first test. Okay, that name is range, and I'll rename it up here. Percentile, come on, Bowman, you can type 1. All right. So I've got some named ranges. I've named student grades, overall gain, and percentile 1, test 1. Now, when you're naming a range, there's a couple of things you have to watch out for. The first character in the name has to be a number or a letter. It can't be an underscore, for example. The second thing to know is you can't use parentheses. You can't use hyphens. You can't use the pound sign, anything like that. Numbers, stick to numbers and letters, and you're going to be A-OK. The other thing to know about naming ranges is you can't put any spaces in there. So you'll see, like here for student grades, student grades all smushed together, right? If you do want to make it look more like real words and you want like, well, I want a space in there, right? Well, you can't use a space, but you can use an underscore to sort of imitate a space, but you cannot use a space. So underscore is the way to go. Capitals, lowercase, doesn't make any difference. All right. So we've got some named ranges, student grades, percentile 1, and overall gain. Okay. And just for giggles, I'm going to go ahead and center those just to make it look a little prettier. All right. There we go. All right. So that is the first hack, learning to name ranges. And you think, wow, that's great, but that didn't actually give us any information, right? I mean, isn't the point of this session, like, how do you get information out of your data? It didn't give me anything. Well, it doesn't. All right. What you're doing is you're basically setting up the spreadsheet so that when you go later to start pulling information, it's easy to find the sources of those information in a way that makes sense. I don't have to refer to B3 through B102. I can just refer to a group of data called student grades, which is very cool. So that's number 1. And I would say that is probably the most important thing. Learn to name your ranges. Now, when we come to part 2 of this series, we're going to talk about setting up variables for formulas and things like that. But it's the same technique, just take it to the next level. So name ranges. All right, what's next? So now that we have done that, we can take a look at hack 2. But looking at my notes, I do see I forgot something. So pardon for that. If you ever need to change the name of a named range, or you want to modify it in some way, it's actually pretty simple to do. I'm going to go up here to my top menu. I've got File, Home, Insert, Page Layout, Formulas. I'm going to choose Formulas. Then we got a bunch of junk. But then we have this thing called Name Manager. And if I click on it, what you'll see is it gives me all of the cells and ranges that I have given a specific name to. So it tells me the name, it tells me what information is in that range, where it is, and which workbook it's in. All right. So let's say we had done this one called first student gain, right? I just use it as a sample. I'm going to hit edit, and I'm going to change it to first underscore student underscore gain. So I can rename it if I have a typo or I want to change it in some way, or I find that there are 2 groups of data that are kind of similar and I want to make sure the names are different. That's how you do it. And I'll hit OK and close. And you'll see up there now, first underscore student underscore gain. But it still refers to the same cell. I've just changed the name. Okay, so that's a bit of cleanup. So basically, we have now prepped this spreadsheet to start pulling some information, which is why we're here. All right, let's take a look. So that's number 1, name your ranges. Now, Once we have done that, one of the most basic things that we do when we're starting to pull information is we just want to count, right? How many fifth graders? How many kids made gains? How many have scale scores of a certain level, for example, right? We just want to know the number of items that meet certain criteria. And it's actually really, really simple to do, because if there's one thing that Excel excels at, it's counting. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to be using something called count if. Now, you may have used count before. Let me just show you. So we've got something called count if. So we've got count gives us a number of cells in a range. But we're going to modify this a little bit, call it count if. And this will do exactly what it sounds like. We will count items if they meet a particular criteria. So we're going to do some formulas, and don't panic if you're like, oh my gosh, formulas, that's tough. It's actually, with these techniques, it's actually really, really simple to do. More simple than most people realize. So don't freak, bear with me. I'm going to make it easy for you. Okay, so whenever we write a formula in Excel, it's always going to start with an equal sign. So let me get an equal in there. I'm going to just hand write it out. The next part is, what is the type of formula? What are we trying to do? And in this case, we're going to use, come on, big fat fingers, count if, which does exactly what it sounds like. Count items if they meet a certain criteria. Now, with any formula, so we start with the equal, we've got the name of the formula, and then all the parameters and all the stuff we want to do is always going to be in parentheses. So that's the basic. Where it becomes interesting is, what do we put here, right? These are our parameters. Like, we're going to count if, well, what are the criteria? And that's going to go right there between those two parentheses. So let's try it, right? And this will also demonstrate why those named ranges are so useful. So count if. So let's think about our question first of all. Let's say we want to know, just counting, how many fifth graders do we have? So our question is, how many fifth grade students? All right. And we've got a set of data, set of information that shows the student grades. So how many of those are fifth grade? It seems like a pretty simple problem. Simple question to answer. Now, what we don't want to do is we don't want to use our arrow keys and just start going through many. Where's 1, 2, 3? I can do this manually 3 times and get 3 different answers. It is prone to error, and it's slow, right? And even worse, we don't want to print this off and get our highlighters out and just start circling them, then count them up later. There's no reason to do that. Excel will do it for us using this formula called count if. So we want to know fifth graders, right? Okay, so let's give it a formula. We start with the equal. We're going to count the items if they meet a certain criteria. And there's our parenthesis. Now, I do these formulas all the time. I've got them all memorized. But if you're like, okay, I know I need to do that, but I don't know what to put next. Well, nifty, Excel will tell us what information we need to do next. Right below that cell, it says count if, and then it tells me, here's what you need to put in the next place, right? And what it's telling me is range, and it's in bold, and that's what I need to enter. So I need to find the range. Where are the data that I'm going to be counting, right? What's the range? What am I looking for? Well, I could say B3 through B102, and you'll see that it highlights all that. If I ever go back to look at it, I'm like, wait, what? Where am I looking? What am I doing? What is that information? Well, we gave those grades a name, that whole series of cells a name, and we called it student grades. So instead of putting the actual reference, we just put in the name that we gave it. So now I know that I am counting within the data set called student grades. That's what I want. Now, a couple things just happened that are pretty interesting. When I typed in student grades, the first thing that happened is you'll see that it selected all of those grades. So as soon as I put in student grades, it said, aha, here's where we're going to look. And you see that it's selected all the way down to 102. It's selected all of those data for us because that range is called student grades. The other thing that happened is in the formula, the name student grades turned blue. So if I back it up one, student grade, it's black, right? But as soon as I put in that S, Excel is telling me, oh, I know what this is. There is actually something called student grades, and I know what it is and where it is. And it turns blue. So it's an indicator that Excel is recognizing that as a legitimate name for a group of data. Turns it blue. All right, so following my little prompt down below that cell, count if range, I need to put in my comma, that's next. And now the word criteria is highlighted, or it's in bold. So I know where to look. What am I looking for? So count within student grades if, now I need the if it meets this criteria. And I want to know 5th grade students. So I'm going to put in a 5. So look inside student grades. Tell me how many times the number 5 comes up. And then like any formula, I close it with a parenthesis and hit enter. Oh, there are 13 5th grade students. So what did we have here? So the overall formula, that's sort of the template for the formula, is count if. The first thing we're doing is we're putting in the range and a comma. Don't forget the comma. And then we put in the criterion, which is what are we looking for? So this is where do we look? And this is what are we looking for? Very simple. All right, let's get back to our spreadsheet. And that's what we've got. So we have 13 5th graders. That's great. We can change the 5, put in 4. There are 9 4th graders. So in nothing flat, we now have recounted all of that and come up with a new answer. Let's say we want 3rd graders. There's 3rd grade. There's 23 of them. It turns out we can even make this a little more efficient, a little less work. So if we look at our formula, look in student grades, and tell me how many times this 3 comes up, right, and count it. Well, if we want to look for a different grade, or we wanted to look for a different criterion, we could go back and just keep rewriting that formula every time, do what I did, get in there, swap it out, put in another number, and do that. But there's an easier way to do it, much more efficient. Instead of putting in the actual number, we can refer the formula to a different cell which contains the information that we want. Let me show you how that works. So let's take this cell right here, and I'm going to highlight it in a kind of a light orange, and I'm going to put a 5 in there. All right, 5 for 5th grade in this case. Now, in my formula, instead of typing in 5, I can just say, go look in this other cell over here. That's what we want to find, right? So instead of 5, I'm going to just take that out. Now I'm going to simply click on this cell over here, and it puts in D1. So basically we're telling Excel, whatever's in D1, that's what you're looking for, okay? We're not looking for 5, we're looking for whatever's in D1. just happens to be 5. Where does that become useful? So right now, it's referring back to D1, which is 5, right? Well, if I want to look at 4th grade, I just change that, 9. 3rd grade, I just change it, 23 of them. What's my maximum top? Probably 7th grade. Let me put a 7 in there. So whatever we put in there is what the formula is going to look for, because we don't tell it look for 7, look for 5, whatever. We say look for whatever's in that other cell. So all we have to do is change that number, and it's going to update our count for us. It is a very quick and easy way to come up with an accurate count, the number of items that meet the criteria you give it. You're looking at your student data. Maybe you've got an indicator for ELL or SPED or female or male or whatever it is, and you want to just get a count of how many students meet those criteria. This is the formula you're going to use. Now, let's take this up another level. So that's count if. We're looking at one group of data for one criterion. What if we have more than one criterion? Maybe we want 5th grade students that have a scale score of over 200 or over 500, right? So there's 2 criteria now, and we want to know how many items, students in this case, meet both criteria. So we need to do something a little different than this formula. So instead of count if, we're going to use something called count ifs with an equal sign, and it looks like count if s. And that s right there is going to allow us to look at multiple criteria. Then this is going to be the same over here. And the formula, honestly, is going to look about the same also. We're going to look for a range and a criterion and another range and another criterion. My handwriting is terrible, but that's what it says. And it's the S under count ifs that allows us to do that. Okay, so let's try it. So let's say our formula is, I'm going to have to shrink this a little bit. Let's give it 18. Try that. All right, 5th grade. So 5th grade, let's call it a scale score greater than 500. So how many 5th grade students that also have a scale score over 500? Okay, so we're going to use that count ifs. We're going to still give the range, the first range, and what are we looking for? We'll give the next range, and what are we looking for? So let's try it. So equals count ifs, like that. And Excel is telling me, all right, what's the range, the criterion range number 1? Student grades, comma, and what are we looking for? Let's just go ahead and say we're looking for whatever's in this cell over here, comma. All right, what's the criterion range 2? And I've already named it scale 2. And I know it's the correct name because it changed colors in the formula. And I also see that it highlighted the correct cells over there. All right, what are we looking for? I want anything that's over 500. The formula is correct, but it's going to fail. It is not going to work because we have to do something a little tricky here. But let's go ahead and hit enter and just see what happens. Oh, there's a problem with this formula. Aha. Let's find the problem and let's fix it. The problem is this greater than 500 right here. Greater than 500 is not a single criterion. It's actually 2 criterion. We've got 2 things happening here. We've got 500, but we also have greater than. So there's actually 2 things we're looking at, 2 commands that we have given to Excel which together equal greater than 500. Whenever we're doing that, we have to indicate to Excel, we have to communicate with Excel that these two should equal one thing, not two separate things, not greater than and 500, but they together represent a single criterion. And the way we do it is pretty simple, is we simply put double quotes before and double quotes after to say these two together are one thing. And it will now work. So if you're going to use greater than, less than, greater than or equal, less than or equal, just know you're going to have to put quotation marks around it. Or if you're looking for a word, maybe it's not a number you're looking for, like look for this word, right? It's going to have to go in quotation marks. So let's see if it works now. Let's see if it gives us a result. I will hit enter. 7. So 7 fifth grade students have a scale score above 500. And what Excel has just done is it says, all right, let's look here in the first line. Is it a fifth grade student? No, so it already failed. Let's look in the next one. Is it a fifth grade student? No, it fails. Let's look in the next one. Oh, there's a fifth grade student. So now let's go and check the next criterion way over there under scale score 2. The score is 517. So there's 1. And we'll continue on down through the rest of it and see how many more meet those two criteria. In this case, it's 7. Well, since we referred to D1 for the first criterion, let's take a look at third grade. 6 third grade students have a scale score over 500. 7th grade, 11 of them. Okay, and 2 of them. Now, we have basically taken all the work out of counting with Excel by using the hack number 2, which is count if and count ifs for more than one criteria. So one question is, how many criteria can you use? And I'm not exactly sure. I think you can have up to 9 different criteria to look at. Like if it's this and this and this and this and 9 of them. Frankly, if you need more than 9, you probably need to set up your spreadsheet a little differently anyway, because at that point you're just showing off. So I think it's up to 9. But certainly with 2 or 3 or 4, it's pretty simple. And the thing that makes this so simple, like what are we doing? We're using the names that we have given to those ranges. It makes it very easy to write the formula. And if you need to go back and see what you're doing, it makes it very easy to understand what that formula is doing. Because it's sort of telling us the question, right? Students' grade is 2, and scale score is greater than 500. So we know what it's doing and what it's doing it to. Very simple. All right. So that's count and count ifs. All right. So as you can see, this count, count if, count ifs, they just tell us the number of items that meet the criteria. The first one is a 1, the next one is another 1. So now we got 2, the next one is another, we got 3, and so on. It's just telling us how many. But what it doesn't do is it doesn't give us any values represented by those lines of information. For example, we've got time on the test, right? Or time task for test 2 over here. Time task 2. So it's not counting up the time in this, in this case. It's just saying, is it the right amount of time or not? What if we want to know how many? We want to come up with some value other than just how many items, right? What if we wanted to add up the time taken for fifth grade students take? We need to use a different formula, something a little more advanced than count or count ifs. And that formula is called sum product, and that's SUM. Let me just write it here. SUM. Come on, fingers, product. And it's going to have those. What in the world does that mean? Well, let's break it down. This right here, sum, that just means add, right? If you take 3 plus 4, the sum is 7. Sum means adding up. That's the result of an addition problem. Product right here, that's the result of a multiplication product, multiplication process. Multiply. So what we're going to have Excel do is a little multiplication on every single line to come up with a product for every single line, and then it's going to add them all together. So we're going to multiply across every single line of data product, and then we're going to add them together. Sum. So why would we do this, or how would we do this? But that's what's happening. So let's take a look at an example. So we want, and we'll do one that kind of recreates this. Let's say we want our 5th grade students, and we want to know the total time on test 2. I don't know why you'd want to know that, but it could be very useful if you're trying to come up with an average time, which we'll do next. Little spoiler alert. So the way it looks is this. We've got some product, and we're going to establish some criteria for what are we going to add up, right? So we know we want 5th grade students. So we got to find the 5th grade students. And we want to get the amount of time each student took on the test and then add them all up. All right. And the sum product. So let me write the formula, then let's go back and talk about it. So sum product. So we know in student grades, if student grades equals 5, in this case, then what Excel will do is say, oh, student grade equals 5. The thing to remember is 1 equals yes. So if that's true, Excel is going to give it a value of 1. That's the end of that criterion. I have already made a mistake. Let me do this. All right. And I'll explain why in a moment. The next thing we're going to look at is what's the value under time task 2? How many minutes did those kids take? Time task 2. Now, why did I just put double parentheses in this case? Because each one of these tests has to be inside of its own set of parentheses. So here's test 1 over here, and here is test number 2 over here. Okay. So let's take a look at what we just did. So we've got some product. Some product. Okay. Then the first test was student grades. I'm just going to abbreviate, honestly, equals 5th grade. So that's one test right there. And it's inside of its own set of parentheses. Times, and then we have time task 2. Okay. So that's the next thing we're going to look at over there. And then we close the entire formula with another parenthesis. So that's why we got those doubles at the beginning, at the end, because each of the items inside also needs to have its own set of parentheses. So it's going to look at every single line, and it's going to look at the first line and say, hey, is this a 5th grade student? So if it's a 5th grade student, give it a 1 for yes. Then what are we going to multiply? We're going to give it, let's say the kid took 22 minutes. All right. So 1 times 22 is 22. The next kid, the next line, is it a 5th grade student? No. So it's going to say 0, because 0 for no, times, and let's say this kid took 15 minutes. Well, it didn't meet the criteria for 5th grade, so it's a 0. 0 times 15 is 0. The next kid, yes, he's a 5th grade student, times, and he took 8 minutes. He was really fast. So 1 times 8 equals 8. So these numbers right here, those are our products, right? That's the result of the multiplication. Call them products. And what do we do next? We sum them up. We add them up. The total time in this very simple example is 30 minutes. So we're multiplying across each line. 1 for yes, it meets the criteria. Criterion, 0 for no, it does not. And then what's the value that we're multiplying against? So that's what it's doing. So on our sample data, it's going to look across the first line. It's going to say, is it a 5th grade student? No, it's a 0. So 0 times 29 is still 0. And it'll keep on going down. Here's a 5th grade student. So yes, we give it a 1 times 22 minutes over here. So the product is 22. So now we add 0 plus 22, and it's still just 22. All right, so far so good. Let's make it a little more interesting, right? Let's take off this time task. Let's see if the student meets multiple criteria. So we'll just put another one right in here. Let's call it scale score on the second test is greater than 500. How did those kids, how much time did they take? And times, and it's going to be time task 2, double parenthesis. So with the named ranges, it becomes really easy to write the formula, and we know what it's doing. If student grade equals 5 and the scale score, the second scale score is greater than 500, tell me how much time that kid took. And then do it for the next one, the next one, and the next one. And we get an answer. So here, we've got our sum product. We've got student grade equals 5. Oh, put in my second one. Times scale score 2 is greater than 500 times time 2. Close it. So if the first student is a 5th grade, give it a 1. The next student, if the same student is more than 500, give it a 1. And then give me their time, 22 minutes. And the result is 22 minutes. So 1 times 1, right? Next student, not a 5th grade student, but maybe he does have a scale score greater than 500. So we'll give it a 1 because it's true. Times, and maybe this kid took 20 minutes equals 20. And so on the way down. So 1 times 1 times 1 is 1 times 20, 1 times 22. There's our product. 0 times 1 is 0. 0 times 20 is, oops, let's fix that. 0 times 20 is 0. So when we add them all up, for the kids that met both criteria, the total amount of time is 22. And it's going to go through every single line in those ranges. There's one catch. Well, there's 2 catches. There's one catch. And that is when you are looking at ranges. So in this case, student grades and time on task and scale scores, those ranges have to be the same length. Because otherwise it's going to try to go down to the next one and all the information is not there and it's going to fail, right? Because it's going to go straight across, and then it's going to get to the bottom and it's like, wait, there's nothing there. Maybe the other ranges have some stuff, but this one doesn't. So what do I do? I'm Excel and I'm stumped, right? And it's going to fail. So the named ranges have to be the same length. And in this case, they are all the same. They all go down to row 102. So it succeeded. All right. Let's just do one little modification. Student grades equals whatever's over in this cell over here. All right. And that's no longer true. So student grades is 2, scale score greater than 500, time on task. So that's going to give me the total time on task for the kids that meet that criteria. Some product is incredibly useful for finding out how much of something you've got across multiple criteria. And again, I think you're limited to 9, but same caveat as before, you probably don't need more than 9 criteria. So whereas count and count if and count ifs just tell you how many meet the criteria, this one will actually produce a value for you on quantities like we have here. All right, so honestly speaking, who cares, right? So in this silly little example, really, who cares how much time the kids took? Well, it can be useful if you're trying to find out averages or some other things. But you can also look at, you want to know how many assignments kids turned in. You want to know how many points were assigned on a particular assignment. You want to look at how much instructional time students have received based on their absences and based on their attendance and things like that. How many hours of instruction did you provide, right? So there are some cases where you would use something like this in just sort of your everyday settings. But maybe we want to know something a little bit different. So that was hack number 3, some product. But let's say we want to find out the average time. See, right now we have looked at kids, 2nd grade, who received over a particular scale score and how much time did they take. But what's the average amount of time that students made in a particular grade? What's the typical kid? If you had enough kids, you start approaching a bell curve. So what's the average? Well, it turns out hack number 4 is something called average if, and it allows us to find an average value for all the items or all the kids that meet certain criteria. And it looks like this. Equals, let's put another, come on, Bowman, you can do it. Equals, sorry about that. My hands are way too fat, apparently. All right. So equals average. We'll do that one first. We're going to look at average if, and just like count if, average if says 1 criterion. Or we can have multiple criteria, average if S. And that'll allow us to do multiple. So let's just run through these right quick. So, and it's having done count if, and count ifs, this one really starts to be pretty easy to understand. But let's try it. What the heck? All right. So let's start with average. So equals average. All right. This is just going to look at a whole row of numbers and just give us the average of all those numbers, right? It's not going to look at criteria. It's not going to be like, if you meet certain expectations, whatever. It's just, here's the numbers, give me the average of all of them. So the average time on the second task, the average time on across all those numbers, 48.89 minutes. All right. And I'm just going to run this, put it over here real quick, 0.89, just so we can refer to it later. Well, la-di-da. All right, what if we want to know average time for 5th graders? Okay. Well, now we need to use that second one, average ifs, IFS. So let's drop it in there. Average ifs. And what does Excel tell me I need to do? It says the first thing you need to do is, where are the numbers that we're going to average? So like when we did count and count ifs, we put in a range and we put in a criteria. We put another range, put another criteria, put another range, put another criteria. But at the end, but that's only like how many meet those criteria. But here we want to, end up with some numbers that we can average. So the first thing that Excel tells us we need to do is, where are the numbers that we're going to average up? We'll figure out the criterion for each one, which ones to count later. But first, tell me, where are the numbers we're going to average? And Excel calls that the average range. So let's say it's time, task, 2. So we're going to be averaging up numbers in that particular range. And now, comma, what are my criteria? Well, I want 5th grade students. So I need to do our criteria range. So this is student grades, comma, and what's the criterion? 5. And actually, with only one criterion, we can just use average if. Range criterion. But let's go ahead and just finish this example. All right. So we're going to average up numbers in time task 2, how many minutes. We're going to look to see if the student grade is equal to 5. The average time for 5th grade students was 35.38461,538 minutes. And frankly, if you are counting minutes to that many decimal points, your life is too busy. So let's back them up. Let's go back to a tenth. That's just 6 seconds. That's precise enough, right? All right. So that's actually 35 minutes and 24 seconds right there, or 35.4 minutes. So the average time for our 5th grade students is 35.4 minutes. Well, interestingly, I said I wanted to record this other number just for comparison. The average time for all students was 48.9 minutes. The average time for 5th grade students was 35.4. So the 5th grade students actually, on average, took a little less time on their test. How interesting is that? We can start doing things now like, did they typically score better? Did they score worse? How do their scale scores compare? Because we know that on average they took less time. Did it make any difference in their scores? Did it make any difference in their overall gains? That would be interesting to know. But it's predicated on average ifs. So we're just doing one criteria, like we just did. So it's the range we're going to average. So what are we looking at? So it's time, task 2. The criterion is 5, and the range, the average range. Actually, that's time task 2. So look in student grades for a 5, and if it meets it, then average up the scores that are over in time task 2. And you see it's the exact same number. And the reason why it's the same number is we're only applying one criterion. So if we're going to do just one, we could do average ifs, or we could do average if. All right. When we have more than one criterion, then we must use average ifs with the S on it. Okay, so we can do more than one. Let's do more than one. All right. So average ifs. Let's say, so we want student grade. Oh, what are we averaging up? The numbers we are averaging up are time task 2. How much time in the second test? Our first criterion range, student grades over here. The criterion is, I'm going to just say, click on that one over there, just like I did before. So whatever's in D1, that's the grade to look for. And let's do another one. Let's say scale 2. And what are we looking for? Kids who got a scale score greater than 500. Now, just like count and count if and count ifs, we cannot simply put it greater than 500 because it's two things, two criteria there. So we need to put it in quotation marks again, like that. All right, so now we've got two criteria. We're going to average up the numbers in time test 2. Our first criterion, look in student grades for whatever's in D1. It's a 5 in this case. Then for our second criterion, look in the range scale score 2 and find all the kids that had greater than 500. If they meet the criterion, use their number or include their number in the overall average, 38.9. Oh, interestingly, that's exactly 10 minutes less than the overall average. How neat is that? I wasn't expecting that. That's interesting. We want to change it to 4th grade, 60 minutes. So in 4th grade, the kids who have a scale score over 500, they actually took more than 10 minutes more than the average. 3rd grade, 64, 2nd grade, look at those numbers just going up. So those kids at those grades, the lower what I'm learning, it's kind of interesting to me actually. The lower the grade, the more time they're taking to reach that or exceed that scale score. Any first graders? Nope, no first graders. So there are no first graders there's no data that meets both of those criteria. First grade, scale score greater than 500. So I got a division error because you can't divide by 0. How did our 7th graders do? 102 minutes, holy moly. And then 39 or 40 minutes for the 6th graders. That's interesting to me. And back to our 5th graders again. So it's probably those 7th graders pushing up the average because they took a long time to reach that scale score or exceed it. All right, so that's average ifs, and it's very, very simple to perform. So once we've got our named ranges, hack number 1, it becomes very simple to just count how many items or how many students meet certain criteria. That's number 2, count if for one criterion, count ifs for multiple. If we want to result in a value, not just how many meet the criterion, but what number, or we want to come up with a total amount of something, that's where sum product becomes very useful. And since we're really looking at criterion, we're not looking at everything. We want certain information from certain data, and we want to average it. So average ifs. And that allows us to apply criterion to look through a massive data and just pull out the pieces that are going to answer our specific questions. Once we've got a question, we figure out where are those data, and then we use these 3 formulas, count if, sum product, average if, to pull out specific information to answer our questions. So those, as I talked about doing a lot of analyses, those are the 3 techniques plus named ranges that at some point I'm going to be doing with just about every single data set I've got. And as you see, it's pretty simple to do. So just to wrap up, again, my name is David Bowman. I am the Executive Director for REC1, Regional Education Cooperative number 1 up here in Farmington. And we are, just as an FYI, we are going to be posting this video in the next couple of days up on our YouTube channel. So if you want to go back and review, you like, wow, this is the most amazing thing I've ever seen for Excel. Holy moly, I want to share this with all my colleagues because they are going to love it. Then you'll find this on our YouTube page, which you can just access and browse at your leisure to your heart's content, and share with others. And as always, if you want to hit me up with some questions like, can you please re-explain that again? Or why do we do that again? Or this is what my data look like. and how would I use this formula, this hack on my data, you are welcome to do so. You've got my email address and it's all over our website. So feel free to just send me an email and I'd be happy to help you out as you move forward on mastering Excel. So thank you all very much. It's been a pleasure and a lot of fun. And I just wish you well and just say thank you for all you're doing. Have a great day.